You spent 5 years planning to rob me. My voice cracked as I stared at the computer screen, at the emails between my husband and his lawyer. They'd named their scheme the investment phase. My grandmother's inheritance, my military pension, everything I'd worked for itemized in a spreadsheet like inventory at a garage sale. My hands trembled against the desk, but not from fear. 20 years in military intelligence had taught me to recognize an enemy operation when I saw one. And I'd been sleeping next to the enemy for 5 years. Cooking his meals, washing his clothes, believing his lies. But they'd made one fatal mistake. They forgot who they were dealing with. They forgot that before I was a wife, I was a warrior. My name is Margaret Winters, and at 42 years old, I'd spent 2 decades serving my country as an intelligence officer in the United States Army. I'd analyzed enemy movements in Baghdad, decoded intercepted communications in Kabul, identified threats before they materialized. I'd earned my rank through sacrifice, through nights spent in command centers while others slept, through decisions that carried the weight of lives. But I could never have imagined that the most dangerous enemy would be sharing my bed, eating at my table, wearing the gold watch I'd given him for his birthday, using my grandmother's money to fund his country club lifestyle. Let me take you back to where this ended before I tell you where it began. 3 months ago, on a humid Tuesday morning, I stood in that Alexandria courtroom wearing my army dress uniform. Every medal on my chest represented a moment when I'd put duty before self, country before comfort. The Bronze Star from my second tour, the Meritorious Service Medal from countless operations I still couldn't discuss. 20 years of service condensed into ribbons and brass, worn like armor into battle. But this wasn't a foreign battlefield. This was Fairfax County Circuit Court, and the enemy wasn't wearing a uniform. Nathan sat across from me at the plaintiff's table, his posture relaxed, almost bored. He wore a charcoal grey suit that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage paid for, of course, with my money. His attorney, Marcus Thorne, looked like he'd stepped out of a law firm's promotional brochure. Silver hair, perfectly styled, a voice that could sell ice to Eskimos, hands that had never known a day of real work. They both wore matching smirks, the kind of expression you see on people who think they're the smartest ones in the room. "My client," Thorne began, his voice filling the courtroom like expensive cologne. Too much and too strong. Sacrificed everything for this marriage. While Lieutenant Colonel Winters pursued glory and advancement in the military, Nathan Sloan managed their home, their finances, their entire civilian life. He put his own dreams on hold, his own career aspirations aside, to support his wife's ambitions. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the leather briefcase in my lap. Inside that case was a single document, a piece of paper Nathan had signed 5 years ago and apparently forgotten about entirely. One document that would change everything, that would flip this entire narrative on its head. But first I had to listen to their performance, their carefully rehearsed fiction. For 5 years, Thorne continued, warming to his theme like an actor hitting his stride. Mr. Sloan waited. He waited through deployments, through late nights, through missed anniversaries and cancelled vacations. He built a home for Colonel Winters to return to, a sanctuary from the harsh realities of military life. And what does he get for this devotion? What does he receive for half a decade of unwavering support? He gets ambushed with divorce papers, served publicly at his place of business, humiliated in front of his colleagues. The jury, 6 men and 6 women, a careful balance, listened intently. Some nodded sympathetically. A woman in the front row, maybe 60 years old, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, looked at Nathan with genuine pity. She didn't know what I knew. She hadn't seen what I'd seen. Nathan himself was a study in calculated victimhood. He kept his eyes downcast, occasionally raising them to look at me with what seemed like profound hurt. Once he even produced a handkerchief, an actual white handkerchief, like something from a 1940s movie, and dabbed at his eyes. There were no tears, of course. There never were. But the gesture was effective. I saw another juror, an older gentleman in a Navy veteran's cap, shift uncomfortably in his seat. "Furthermore," Thorne said, building to his crescendo, "my client seeks only what is fair. After managing the couple's considerable assets that grew substantially during the marriage thanks to his careful stewardship, he requests a mere 50%, not a penny more than what any spouse would deserve after years of dedication and sacrifice. Considerable assets, careful stewardship." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that hadn't been lit yet. Nathan had been managing all right, managing to spend $30,000 on a country club membership, managing to trade in a perfectly good Honda for a BMW that cost more than some people's annual salary, managing to redecorate our apartment with art pieces that he claimed were investments, but were really just expensive ways to impress people who didn't matter. Judge Patricia Harrison, a woman in her 60s with steel grey hair and eyes that missed nothing, remained impassive throughout Thorne's presentation. She'd been on the bench for 20 years, had seen every kind of divorce from amicable to apocalyptic. She took notes in a leather-bound journal, her pen moving steadily across the page, giving nothing away. "Your Honor," Thorne concluded, his voice dropping to a sincere, almost whispered register, "we ask the court to recognize Mr. Sloane's contributions to this marriage. Not just the financial management, but the emotional labor, the sacrifices, the dreams deferred. We ask for justice. Justice." The word almost made me laugh. If only they knew what justice really looked like. If only they knew what was in my briefcase. But to understand the explosion that was about to happen in that courtroom, you need to understand the slow burn that led to it. You need to know how a decorated intelligence officer, someone trained to spot deception and analyze threats, could be so thoroughly deceived by someone she loved. You need to understand that the best lies are wrapped in truth, and the most effective enemy is the one who makes you believe they're your ally. It started 5 years ago with a phone call that should have been my first warning. I was sitting in my car in the Pentagon parking garage, engine off, still glowing from my engagement just 2 days prior. Nathan had proposed at sunset on the National Mall, right in front of the Lincoln Memorial. Tourists had applauded. It felt like a movie, which should have been my second warning. Real life doesn't feel like movies unless someone's directing it. My phone rang. Sarah Hayes, my best friend since officer training and now a successful divorce attorney. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Margaret, I ran the background check you asked for." Her voice was crisp, professional. This was attorney Sarah, not friend Sarah. "And?" I asked, though her tone had already told me the answer wouldn't be simple. "He's clean. No criminal record, no outstanding warrants, credit score in the decent range." "But Margaret," she paused and I could hear papers shuffling. "There are patterns here that concern me. Multiple failed businesses, all funded by other people. A string of short-term relationships that ended abruptly. And his current income doesn't match his lifestyle. Maybe he has family money," I suggested, wanting to defend the man who'd just put a 2-carat diamond on my finger. A diamond I'd later learn he'd bought with a loan he expected me to pay off. "Maybe," Sarah said, but her tone suggested otherwise. "Look, I'm not saying don't marry him. I'm saying protect yourself. Get a prenup. Consider it a favor to future Margaret, who will thank present Margaret for being smart." "A prenup?" The word felt cold, calculating. "Sarah, that's so practical, intelligent. Exactly what a lieutenant colonel who's worked 20 years for her assets should do." She sighed. "Margaret, you've got a pension. Savings, that inheritance from your grandmother you mentioned. You're not some starry-eyed private. You're a senior officer with assets to protect. And if Nathan really loves you, he'll understand that." She was right, of course. Sarah was always right about these things. It's why she had a corner office in Alexandria and a win rate that made opposing counsel nervous. But being right and feeling right are two different things. And approaching Nathan about a prenup felt like I was sabotaging our love story before it had even properly begun. I chose my moment carefully. 3 days after Sarah's call, I made Nathan's favorite dinner lamb with rosemary potatoes, a bottle of good wine, candles on our small dining table. Our apartment in Arlington wasn't fancy, but it had a view of the Potomac, and on clear nights, you could see the lights of the monuments across the river. It was peaceful, romantic, the perfect setting for a difficult conversation. "Nathan," I began as we finished our second glass of wine, "I need to discuss something with you." He looked up from his plate, those blue eyes that had charmed me from our first meeting suddenly alert. "That sounds serious." "It's not really. It's just..." I took a breath. "Sarah thinks we should have a prenuptial agreement. Just to protect both of us, keep things clear and simple." The transformation was instant and devastating. The warmth drained from his face like someone had opened a valve. He set down his wineglass with careful precision, the kind of controlled movement that speaks of suppressed emotion. "I see," he said quietly, too quietly. "So we're already planning for failure?" "No, that's exactly what it is, Margaret." He stood up from the table, walked to the window. The monument lights made his silhouette dramatic, like he was posing for a photograph. Everything with Nathan, I'd learn later, was calculated for maximum effect. I'm not one of your mission parameters. I'm not a tactical problem to be solved. I'm supposed to be your partner. You are my partner, I said, standing too, moving toward him. This isn't about you. It's about trust, he interrupted, turning to face me. And there, right there, I saw them. Tears. Actual tears in his eyes, catching the light from the candles. I gave up my job in New York to move here for you. I rearranged my entire life around your career, your deployments, your needs. And now you want me to sign a document that says if things get hard, you get to keep everything? The guilt hit me like a physical weight. He was right, wasn't he? He had moved for me. He had rearranged his life. Although looking back now, I realize his job in New York was another failed startup funded by investors he'd charmed and disappointed, and moving to DC had been an escape, not a sacrifice, but I didn't know that then. All I knew was that the man I loved was crying, and I was the cause. Okay, I said, the word coming out before I could stop it. We don't have to… No. He turned back to the window, shoulders set in a line of noble suffering. If you need this to feel safe, we'll do it. I'll sign whatever you want me to sign. Because your happiness, your security, matters more to me than any piece of paper ever could. He'd agreed, but he'd done it in a way that made me feel like a monster. Sarah called it emotional manipulation when I described the conversation to her. I called it love. We were both right in our own ways. The signing took place 2 weeks later in Sarah's office in Old Town Alexandria. It's a beautiful part of the city, all cobblestone streets and historic buildings. The kind of place where you can almost forget your minutes from the Pentagon. Sarah's office was on the 3rd floor of a converted townhouse, all dark wood and leather-bound books. The kind of space that whispered of serious business and serious money. Nathan arrived 15 minutes late, carrying a bouquet of white roses. For the execution, he said with a sad smile, handing them to me. Since we're killing the romance today? Sarah's jaw tightened, but she maintained her professional composure. She'd seen this performance before, the wronged lover making a grand sacrifice. She slid the agreement across her mahogany desk. 20 pages of legal language that basically said what's mine stays mine, what's yours stays yours. And neither of us can claim the other's assets in a divorce. I recommend you read this thoroughly, Sarah said, her voice carefully neutral. Take your time. Ask questions if you have them. Nathan picked up the pen, a heavy Mont Blanc that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and flipped directly to the last page. Without reading a single word, he signed his name with a flourish. There, he said, pushing the document back across the desk. Satisfied? He looked at me then, and there it was, that smile. At the time, I thought it was a smile of reassurance, telling me that this meaningless paper couldn't touch our real love. Now I know it was the smile of a con artist who'd just convinced his mark to lock away the evidence that would eventually destroy him. I took the signed document home that night and locked it in my fireproof safe, a heavy steel box I kept in my home office. I spun the combination lock my grandmother's birthday, a date Nathan never bothered to learn, and placed the prenup inside with my service medals, my will and my grandmother's pearl necklace. As the safe door closed with a solid thunk, I felt a mixture of relief and guilt. Relief that I'd protected myself as Sarah advised. Guilt that I'd needed to. 3 years passed. They were good years, mostly. Nathan found work as a consultant, though I was never entirely clear what he consulted on. He was charming at military functions, knew how to work a room, how to make the right people laugh at the right times. He remembered names, asked about people's children, sent thoughtful holiday cards. If being a military spouse was a performance, Nathan deserved an Oscar. But there were moments, little cracks in the facade that I explained away or ignored entirely. The credit card bills that were always a little higher than they should be. The business dinners that somehow always happened when I was deployed or working late. The way he'd sometimes look at me when he thought I wasn't watching, calculating something I couldn't quite identify. Then my grandmother Rose died. She was 95 years old, had lived through the Depression, World War II, the civil rights movement, everything America had thrown at her generation. She'd been a teacher for 40 years, never made more than a modest salary. But she'd saved religiously, invested wisely, lived below her means. When she died peacefully in her sleep at her home in California, she left behind an estate that surprised everyone, $3 million in investments and 2 properties. a house in Pasadena and a cabin in Big Bear. She left it all to me, not to my mother, who'd been waiting for that inheritance for years. Not to my brother, who'd already spent it in his mind. To me because, as she wrote in her will, Margaret has the discipline to honor what this money represents, a lifetime of careful choices and delayed gratification. I flew back from the funeral in a daze of grief and responsibility. Nathan met me at Dulles Airport, and for once his performance was perfect. He held me while I cried, didn't say anything stupid about silver linings or God's plan, just let me grieve. He drove me home in silence, made me tea, sat with me while I processed the loss of the woman who'd taught me what strength really looked like. But 2 days later, at the lawyer's office in Rosslyn where the will was formally read, I saw something shift in Nathan's eyes when the attorney announced the final number. $3 million plus the property's total value approximately $3.8 million. It was like watching a switch flip. His hand found mine under the table, squeezed it with what felt like support but was really possession. "We'll honor her memory," he whispered. "We'll be smart with this, baby." The words stood out like a red flag I was determined not to see. Within a week, Nathan had a proposal. We were sitting in our living room, the lights of D.C., twinkling across the river when he took both my hands in his and looked at me with those earnest blue eyes. "I've been thinking," he began, which should have been my first warning. Nathan thinking usually meant my bank account was about to get lighter. "This inheritance, it's a game changer, but it's also a responsibility. You're already juggling your military career. And now you've got to manage all these investments, the properties, the tax implications. It's too much for one person." "I can handle it," I said, though truthfully I was feeling overwhelmed. The military had taught me to command troops, analyze intelligence, make life or death decisions. It hadn't taught me about capital gains tax or property management. "Of course you can," Nathan said quickly. "You can handle anything. But why should you have to? I want to help. Let me quit my consulting work and focus on managing our portfolio full-time. I've been studying investment strategies, real estate markets. I can turn this inheritance into something even bigger, something that would make your grandmother proud. Our portfolio, our inheritance." The words slid in so smoothly I barely noticed them. "Nathan, I don't know." "Margaret." He cupped my face in his hands, a gesture that used to melt me but would later make my skin crawl. "For 3 years I've watched you carry the weight of your service, your duty. Let me carry something for you. Let me be your partner in this, truly. Your grandmother worked her whole life to build this legacy. Let me help you honor it." It sounded so reasonable, so loving. "A modern marriage of equals, where the husband supports the wife's career by taking on the domestic burden. Progressive. Admirable, even." I said yes. The transformation was immediate and stunning. Within a month, the reliable Honda Accord he'd driven since we met was gone, replaced by a BMW 5 Series in metallic blue. "It's about projecting success," he explained when I raised an eyebrow at the $80,000 price tag. "In my new role as a portfolio manager, I need to look the part. You can't show up to investment meetings in a Honda." "What investment meetings?" I wanted to ask but didn't, because asking would mean admitting I was having doubts, and having doubts would mean Sarah had been right all along. Next came the country club membership. Not just any country club, but Congressional Country Club, where senators golfed and deals worth millions were made over martinis. The initiation fee alone was $30,000, with monthly dues that could have fed a small family. "It's networking," Nathan insisted. "This is where the real opportunities are. Trust me, this investment will pay for itself 10 times over." I trusted him. God help me, I trusted him. Our apartment, which had been perfectly comfortable with its simple furniture and lived-in charm, suddenly wasn't good enough. Nathan hired an interior decorator, a sharp-faced woman named Vivienne, who spoke about energy flow and investment pieces. Out went my comfortable couch, the dining table I'd bought at an estate sale, the bookshelves that had followed me from base to base. In came Italian leather sofas, a glass dining table that cost more than I made in a month, abstract art that Nathan assured me would appreciate in value. "You have to think like wealthy people think," he'd say when I protested. "Your grandmother saved every penny, and that was admirable for her generation. But we're not Depression-era teachers. We're investors. We're builders. We need to act like it." The credit card statements became a source of constant anxiety. Dinners at restaurants where the wine list started at $200 a bottle. Weekend trips to New York to scout investment properties that were really just excuses to stay at the Saint. Regis and C Broadway shows, golf lessons, tennis lessons, sailing lessons, because these are the sports of the connected class, Margaret. But it was at a Christmas party that I finally saw the truth I'd been working so hard to avoid. The party was at Fort Myer Officers Club, a formal affair with dress uniforms and evening gowns. I was talking to a colleague about a recent deployment when I excused myself to get a drink. As I approached the bar, I heard Nathan's voice carrying over the crowd. He was holding court with a group of defense contractors, men with soft bodies and hard eyes who made millions selling equipment to people like me. Nathan had a scotch in his hand, Macallan 25, I noted, because I'd seen the receipt for the bottle he'd bought and was gesturing expansively. Margaret's career is admirable, absolutely, he was saying, his voice carrying that particular tone of condescension wrapped in praise. But let's be honest, gentlemen. The military teaches you to follow orders, not make money. That's where I come in. She handles the service to country, I handle the service to our portfolio. One of the contractors, a man named Davidson, whom I'd briefed on security protocols just a month earlier, asked, "So what exactly is it you do, Nathan?" Nathan laughed, a sound like expensive whiskey over ice. "I manage our family wealth. It's a full-time job, believe me. Margaret's grandmother left us quite an estate, and I've been restructuring everything, moving from conservative bonds into growth opportunities. Real estate, some crypto, a few SPACs I'm very excited about. The kind of moves Margaret wouldn't understand, no offense to her, of course. She's brilliant at what she does. But financial strategy requires a different kind of intelligence. A different kind of intelligence. As if 20 years of analyzing complex threats, managing multi-million-dollar operations, and making decisions that affected national security hadn't given me any intellectual capabilities worth mentioning. I stood frozen at the bar, my hand gripping the edge so tightly my knuckles went white. The bartender asked what I wanted to drink, but I couldn't speak. I was watching my husband, the man I'd trusted with my grandmother's legacy, with my financial future, with my heart reveal himself as exactly what Sarah had warned me he might be, a predator in an expensive suit. That night, I confronted him. We were back in our apartment, the one now filled with investment pieces that felt like props in someone else's life. Nathan was loosening his bow tie, humming something tuneless, pleased with himself after his performance. "I heard what you said," I began, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. At the bar. About my lack of financial intelligence. He didn't even have the grace to look embarrassed. Instead, he rolled his eyes at me, like I was a child having a tantrum. "Oh, come on, Margaret. Don't be so sensitive. You know I respect your work, do you? Because it sounded like you think I'm an idiot who can only follow orders." That's when the mask didn't just slip, it fell off entirely. His face contorted into something ugly, something I'd never seen before but realized had always been there, waiting. "You know what?" He stepped closer, and I could smell the scotch on his breath, see the contempt in his eyes. "Yeah, that's exactly what I think. You're great at taking orders, at playing soldier, at all that yes or no sir bullshit. But you don't know the first thing about real life. About making money, about moving in the circles that actually matter. You'd still be shopping at Target and driving a used car if it wasn't for me." "With my grandmother's money," I said quietly. "Money you didn't even know what to do with," he was shouting now. "Money that would have sat in some pathetic savings account earning 2% if I hadn't taken control. You should be grateful. I'm giving you a life you never could have achieved on your own. I'm making us into something more than just another military couple living paycheck to paycheck. Us. We are. The pronouns of possession, of theft disguised as partnership." "Get out," I said. "Excuse me?" "Get out of my apartment. Now." He laughed, an ugly sound. "Your apartment? Check the lease, sweetheart. My name's on it too." He was right. Somehow, over the years, his name had been added to everything. The lease, the bank accounts, the credit cards. Everything except the one thing that mattered, the trust where my grandmother's inheritance was held. That, thank God and Sarah's foresight, was still in my name alone. Nathan stomped off to the bedroom, our bedroom, though it would never feel like mine again, and I was left standing in the living room full of things I didn't want, bought with money that wasn't his, living a life I didn't recognize. That night, while Nathan slept off his scotch and his rage, I sat in my home office with my laptop open and began my reconnaissance. 20 years of intelligence work had taught me that information is ammunition. And if Nathan had declared war, which he clearly had, then I needed to arm myself. I started with the obvious, our financial statements. Credit cards, bank accounts, investment portfolios. What I found made my stomach turn. In the 18 months since my grandmother's death, Nathan had burned through nearly $400,000. The BMW, the country club, the apartment renovation that was just the tip of the iceberg. There were charges for things I'd never seen, jewelry purchases from Tiffany, who was he buying jewelry for. Hotel stays in Miami and Vegas when he was supposedly at investment conferences in New York. Cash withdrawals of $5,000 or more that disappeared without explanation. But it was his browser history that revealed the real story. Nathan wasn't as tech-savvy as he thought. He'd cleared his regular browser but forgot about the backup laptop he sometimes used, an old MacBook he kept in the office. At 2 a.m., while he snored in the bedroom, I powered it on and started digging. The searches told a story of premeditation that chilled me to the bone. Virginia divorce law inheritance. How long married to claim spouse inheritance. Convert separate property to marital property. VA prenup loopholes, Virginia. How to hide assets during marriage. The dates on these searches were revealing. Some went back 2 years, a full year before my grandmother died. He'd been planning this before she was even gone, before the inheritance was even mine. He'd looked at me, at our life together, and seen not a partnership but a long con. But the most damaging evidence was in his email. Nathan used a separate Gmail account for his business correspondence, but he'd made the amateur mistake of saving his password in the browser. I logged in and found a goldmine of incrimination. There were dozens of emails with Marcus Thorne, the lawyer he'd later hire for our divorce. They went back 18 months and read like a playbook for marital theft. In one, dated just 3 months after my grandmother's funeral, Nathan wrote Marcus, "The inheritance is secured in trust for now, but I'm working on getting her to commingle the assets. She's resistant, but I'm wearing her down. How long do I need to maintain the marriage after the money is moved to ensure maximum settlement?" Thorne's reply was a masterclass in legal sleaze. Nathan, Virginia is an equitable distribution state. The longer the marriage post-inheritance, the stronger your claim. 5 years is ideal. Also, document everything you do for the household. Every dinner you cook, every errand you run. We'll paint you as the supportive spouse who sacrificed his career for her military ambitions. Juries eat that narrative up, especially with female service members. They see them as cold, career-obsessed. We can work with that. Cold. Career-obsessed. As if serving my country, as if the nights I'd spent in combat zones wondering if I'd ever come home, as if the sacrifices I'd made were character flaws to be exploited. I found a spreadsheet titled Project Margaret. The fact that I was a project made me physically ill that listed all my assets, my military pension, my savings, the inheritance, even the death benefit from my SGLI policy. Next to each item was a column labeled Projected Share, with Nathan's calculations of what he could get in a divorce. The final insult was a folder labeled Insurance. Inside were photos, hundreds of them, all designed to make Nathan look like the perfect husband. Pictures of him cooking dinner on the rare occasions he did, of him at my promotion ceremony looking proud, of us at military balls where he played the supportive spouse to perfection. But each photo had a note attached with details. Margaret absent for 72 hours prior due to training. Or 6th military event this month shows prioritization of career over marriage. He'd been building a case against me for years, documenting a narrative where he was the victim and I was the villain, where my service to my country was a betrayal of him. I sat back in my desk chair as dawn light crept through the windows. My hands were steady, my breathing calm. The initial shock and hurt were transforming into something else, something harder and more useful resolve. Nathan thought he was playing chess while I was playing checkers. He thought his planning and documentation made him superior, made him smarter. But he'd forgotten something crucial about intelligence work. The side with the best information wins. And now I had all of his. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Sarah's number. It was 6 a.m., but I knew she'd be awake. Sarah was always awake before the sun. Said it was when she did her best thinking. "Margaret?" she answered on the first ring, alert despite the hour. "What's wrong?" "I need to see you. Today." "And Sarah?" I paused, looking at the evidence spread across my laptop screen. "Bring your war face. We're going to battle." The meeting with Sarah that morning was like a military briefing. I'd compiled everything I'd found into a secure folder on an encrypted thumb drive. The emails, the searches, the spreadsheet, the photos with their damning notes. Sarah reviewed it all with the intensity of a general studying enemy positions, occasionally making notes in her legal pad, sometimes cursing under her breath. She paused, searching for the right word. This is comprehensive. He documented his entire conspiracy. Margaret, this is like a criminal leaving a signed confession at the crime scene. So we can use it? Use it, Sarah laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was the laugh of a predator that just spotted prey. We're going to destroy him with it. But first, we need to protect your assets. Today. Right now. What followed was a financial special operation. Within hours, Sarah had me in front of a judge getting an emergency order to freeze any joint accounts. We moved the inheritance trust to a new institution, changed all the passwords, added two-factor authentication. We documented every penny Nathan had spent, every purchase he'd made with my money. Sarah hired a forensic accountant who specialized in high-net-worth divorces. A woman named Patricia Chen who looked at Nathan's spending patterns and literally whistled. He's been laundering your money through his lifestyle, Patricia explained, showing me charts and graphs that made Nathan's theft undeniable. Look here, he'd take cash withdrawals from your joint account, deposit them into his personal account, then use that to pay his credit cards. He was trying to make it look like he had independent income. But he doesn't? I asked, though I already knew the answer. His last legitimate income was 3 years ago, a consulting fee of $5,000. Everything else has been your money. Just move through enough accounts to muddy the waters. But the trail is clear if you know how to follow it. Sarah's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. We would file first, taking control of the narrative. We would serve Nathan publicly at his precious country club in front of the very people he'd been trying to impress with my money. We would not ask for negotiations or mediations. We would go straight to court with the prenup he'd signed and the evidence of his attempted fraud. He's going to fight dirty, Sarah warned me. Men like Nathan always do when they're cornered. He'll try to make you look bad, paint you as cold, unfeeling, choosing your career over your marriage. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my grandmother Rose, who'd worked until she was 70, who'd saved every penny not out of fear but out of determination to leave something behind. I thought about the soldiers I'd led, the missions I'd completed, the oath I'd taken to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I'm prepared, I said. The divorce papers were served on a Saturday afternoon. Nathan was at Congressional Country Club, playing golf with potential investors in his latest imaginary venture. The process server, a former Marine Sarah specifically chose for this job, walked right onto the 18th green and handed Nathan the papers in full view of everyone. Sarah got the full report later. Nathan's reaction had been explosive, literally. He'd thrown his golf club, screamed obscenities, had to be escorted off the course by security. His playing partners had disappeared quickly, wanting nothing to do with the drama. Within hours, everyone in his social circle knew that Nathan Sloan was being divorced and that his reaction had been, to put it mildly, unhinged. My phone started buzzing immediately. Calls, texts, voicemails, each more desperate and angry than the last. How dare you humiliate me like this? You'll regret this. I made you who you are. You're nothing without me. Answer your fucking phone. I didn't respond to any of them. Sarah had advised complete radio silence, and I followed that advice with military discipline. Let him spiral, she said. Let him show his true colors. And he did. 3 days after being served, Nathan ambushed me in the parking lot of Fort Belvoir. I was walking to my car after a long day of briefings when his BMW screeched into the space beside me. He jumped out, and the Nathan I saw bore no resemblance to the charming man who'd proposed at the Lincoln Memorial. His hair was disheveled, his expensive shirt wrinkled and stained. He reeked of whiskey, not the expensive stuff he usually drank, but something cheaper, meaner. His eyes were bloodshot and wild. You fucking bitch, he spat, getting right in my face. You think you can just throw me away? After everything I've done for you? I didn't step back. 20 years of facing down actual threats had taught me that backing up just encourages aggression. Instead, I stood straighter, my voice calm and cold. Everything you've done for me? You mean spending my grandmother's money? Calling me too stupid to manage my own finances? Planning for years to steal my inheritance? That's what you've done for me, Nathan. His face went white. You went through my computer. You violated my privacy. That's illegal, is it? Is it more illegal than fraud, than theft, than conspiracy to hide assets? I pulled out my phone. Should I call the police? I'm sure they'd be very interested in your Project Margaret spreadsheet. The fear that flashed across his face was deeply satisfying. He took a step back, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. For a moment I thought he might hit me. Part of me almost hoped he would assault charges would make the divorce even simpler. But Nathan was many things, and stupid wasn't one of them. He knew that hitting a lieutenant colonel on a military base would end with him in federal prison. "This isn't over," he said, his voice dropping to a hiss. "I'll destroy you in court. I'll take everything. You'll have nothing left when I'm done with you." I looked at him then. Really looked at him. This man I'd shared a bed with, shared meals with, shared what I thought was a life with. And I felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, no regret. Just a cold, clear understanding that he'd never been who I thought he was. He'd been a performance, a character he'd played to get access to my life and my money. "No, Nathan," I said quietly. "You'll have nothing. Because that's what you always had, nothing real. Nothing earned, nothing that was actually yours. You're a parasite, and I'm done being your host." I got in my car and drove away, leaving him standing in the parking lot, a broken man screaming threats at taillights. The trial date was set for 3 months later. In that time, Nathan and Marcus Thorne launched a campaign to destroy my reputation. They filed motion after motion, each one more absurd than the last. They claimed I'd hidden assets, that I'd been having affairs during deployments, that I'd been violent and threatening. Each claim was dismissed for lack of evidence, but they kept trying, hoping something would stick. Meanwhile, Sarah built our case with military precision. We had the prenup, of course, our nuclear weapon. But we also had Nathan's emails, his searches, his spending records. We had testimony from the forensic accountant about the money he'd taken. We had statements from neighbours who'd heard him bragging about his plans to cash in on the marriage. The night before the trial, I couldn't sleep. I stood in my bedroom, mine alone now. Nathan had been staying in a hotel since the confrontation and looked at my army dress uniform hanging in the closet. 20 years of service condensed into fabric and metal. The Bronze Star from my second deployment, earned when I'd identified an insurgent cell planning an attack on a forward operating base. The Meritorious Service Medal from countless operations I still couldn't discuss. Each ribbon represented a choice to put something greater than myself first. Tomorrow, for the first time in my career, I would put myself first. And that wasn't selfish, it was necessary. I arrived at the courthouse at 8 a.m. sharp, Sarah beside me. We walked through the marble halls with purpose, my heels clicking against the floor in a steady rhythm. Nathan was already there with Thorne, both of them in expensive suits, both wearing expressions of smug confidence. "Colonel," Thorne said with false politeness, "perhaps we could discuss a settlement before this becomes unnecessarily contentious." Sarah stepped forward before I could respond. "Mr. Thorne, your client has spent the last 3 years stealing from mine, while planning to take even more in a divorce he's been orchestrating since before they were married. The only thing we'll be discussing is how quickly this trial can be concluded." We entered the courtroom, Judge Harrison presiding, a woman known for her no-nonsense approach and her particular distaste for financial manipulation in divorces. The jury was already seated 12 citizens who would decide if Nathan's performance was more compelling than the truth. And that brings us back to where I began this story, with Marcus Thorne painting Nathan as a sacrificing saint and me as the cold military officer who valued career over family. It was a good performance. Thorne was earning his fee and Nathan was playing his role perfectly. When Thorne finally finished his opening statement, Judge Harrison turned to our table. "Does the defense have a response?" Sarah stood slowly, deliberately, every movement calculated for effect. She was small, barely 5'2". But in that moment, she seemed to fill the entire courtroom. "Your Honor," she began, her voice carrying clearly, "we do have a response. In fact, we have a document that will resolve this entire matter immediately." She pulled 3 copies of the prenuptial agreement from her briefcase. The sound of paper against leather was the only noise in the suddenly silent courtroom. Sarah walked to the judge's bench and placed 1 copy before Judge Harrison. She handed the second to a visibly confused Marcus Thorne. And then, with what I can only describe as theatrical flair, she placed the third directly in front of Nathan. The effect was immediate and devastating. Nathan's face went from confused to shocked to terrified in the span of 3 seconds. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Thorne was frantically flipping through the pages, his face growing redder with each paragraph he read. "Your Honor," Thorne stammered, standing up so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. I was not aware my client never disclosed we need time to review, Mr. Thorne. Judge Harrison interrupted, her voice sharp as a blade. Are you telling this court that your client failed to disclose the existence of a prenuptial agreement to his own attorney? The silence that followed was deafening. Thorne looked at Nathan with such fury that I thought he might leap across the table and strangle him. Nathan, for his part, had gone completely pale, his hands shaking as he stared at the document that destroyed everything he'd planned. Judge Harrison adjusted her reading glasses and began to read aloud, her voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom Article 3. Any and all inheritances, gifts, or bequests received by either party during the marriage shall remain the sole and separate property of the receiving party, not subject to division in the event of divorce, she continued, each article another nail in Nathan's coffin. Article 4, all military retirement benefits, pensions and disability payments earned by Lieutenant Colonel Margaret Winters are designated as her sole and separate property. Article 5, both parties hereby waive any and all rights to claim spousal support or alimony from the other party in the event of divorce. Article 7. Each party shall be solely responsible for any and all personal debts incurred in their name during the marriage. With each word, Nathan sank lower in his chair. The jury watched with expressions ranging from surprise to disgust. One woman in the front row actually shook her head in disapproval, whether at Nathan's deception or his stupidity, I couldn't tell. Furthermore, Sarah said, standing again, we have evidence that Mr. Sloane has accumulated personal debts totaling $95,000, all of which, according to Article 7, are his sole responsibility. She produced the forensic accountant's report laying out Nathan's spending in damning detail. The BMW, the country club membership, the trips, the dinners all charged to credit cards in his name, all now his burden alone. Nathan snapped. He jumped to his feet, pointing at me, his face contorted with rage. She tricked me. She knew I wouldn't read it. This whole thing was a setup from the beginning. Mr. Sloane, Judge Harrison's gavel came down hard. You will sit down immediately or be held in contempt. It's fraud, Nathan screamed. She's a manipulative bitch who bailiff, Judge Harrison said calmly. Please escort Mr. Sloane from my courtroom. Mr. Thorne, you have 5 minutes to get your client under control or I'm ruling immediately. As the bailiff approached, Nathan seemed to realize what he'd done. He sat down heavily, all the fight draining out of him. He looked at Thorne desperately, but his lawyer wouldn't even make eye contact. Nathan had humiliated him, made him look like a fool in front of a judge and jury. There would be no more help from that quarter. Judge Harrison looked at the prenup again, then at Nathan, then at me. Lieutenant Colonel Winters, she said, did you coerce Mr. Sloane into signing this agreement? I stood, my posture military straight. No, Your Honor. Mr. Sloane signed it voluntarily. He made a point of not reading it, saying that my security and peace of mind mattered more than any piece of paper. A sound escaped Nathan's throat, something between a sob and a growl. Mr. Thorne, the judge continued, do you have any evidence that this agreement was signed under duress, or that your client lacked the mental capacity to understand what he was signing? Thorne stood reluctantly. No, Your Honor. Then I'm prepared to rule. This prenuptial agreement is valid and binding. All assets listed as separate property remain with their respective owners. Mr. Sloane is entitled to none of Lieutenant Colonel Winters' inheritance, military benefits or premarital assets. Furthermore, as per Article 7, Mr. Sloane is solely responsible for all debts in his name. This divorce is granted, effective immediately. Mr. Sloane, you get nothing. Court dismissed. The gavel came down with finality. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed forward, drawn to the drama of such a spectacular legal defeat. Nathan sat frozen in his chair, staring at nothing, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. He'd spent 3 years and nearly $500,000 of my money playing a game he'd already lost before it began. As I gathered my things, I passed by his table. He looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw him without any mask at all. He looked small, pathetic, and utterly defeated. Margaret, he whispered, please. I have nothing. The debts, I can't pay them. I'll be ruined. I stopped, considering my words carefully. Nathan, you were ruined the day you decided to see me as a mark instead of a partner. You had someone who loved you, who would have given you a real life, a real partnership. But that wasn't enough for you. You wanted what you hadn't earned, and now you have exactly what you deserve, nothing. I walked out of that courtroom with my head high, Sarah beside me. Behind us, we left the wreckage of Nathan's scheme and the ashes of what I'd once thought was love. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Nathan's humiliation in court became legendary in DC, legal circles. The country club revoked his membership within a week, citing a morals clause about conduct unbecoming. His investor friends disappeared overnight. The BMW was repossessed when he couldn't make the payments. Within 2 months, he'd filed for bankruptcy and left Virginia entirely. I heard later he'd moved to Florida, was working as a bartender, telling anyone who'd listen about how he'd been wronged by his military ex-wife. But I wasn't interested in tracking Nathan's downfall. I had my own life to rebuild. The first thing I did was call a company to come and remove everything Nathan had bought for the apartment. The Italian leather sofas, the glass table, the abstract art, all of it went to auction. I donated the proceeds to a veterans charity. Then I went shopping not at the high-end stores Nathan had favoured, but at the same reasonable places I'd always shopped. I bought a comfortable couch, a solid wood dining table, bookshelves for my books. I made the apartment mine again, filling it with things that had meaning instead of price tags. But the real transformation came 6 months later. I was having dinner with Sarah, celebrating her latest courtroom victory, when she said something that changed everything. "You know what you should do with your grandmother's money," she said over our second glass of wine. "You should use it to help other people avoid what happened to you." "What do you mean?" "I see it all the time, Margaret. Service members, especially women, who get taken advantage of financially by spouses or partners. They're so focused on their duty, their deployments, their service that they don't see the predators circling. You could help them." The idea took root immediately. Within 3 months, I'd established the Rose Winters Foundation, named for my grandmother, using a significant portion of the inheritance, the money Nathan had so desperately wanted. I created a program offering free financial literacy and legal resources to military families. We offered workshops on base teaching service members about prenuptial agreements, asset protection, and financial planning. Sarah joined the board and helped establish a network of attorneys willing to provide low-cost or pro bono services to military families. We brought in financial advisors to teach investment basics, tax planning, and debt management. The response was overwhelming. Within the first year, we'd helped over 500 military families protect their assets and plan for their futures. I heard stories that broke my heart: young enlisted soldiers whose spouses had emptied their accounts while they were deployed, officers whose partners had run up massive debts in their names, widows who'd been cheated out of death benefits by predatory relatives. But I also heard success stories. A sergeant who'd gotten a prenup before his marriage and avoided losing his re-enlistment bonus in a divorce. A female pilot who'd learned to spot the red flags of financial abuse and left a relationship before it cost her everything. A young couple who'd taken our financial planning course and were now building wealth together, transparently and honestly. The moment that showed me I'd found my purpose came about a year after establishing the foundation. I was leading a workshop at Fort Myer, standing before a room full of young service members, some with their spouses beside them. I'd just finished sharing an abbreviated version of my story, leaving out Nathan's name but keeping the lessons learned. A young captain in the back raised her hand. She looked so young, so earnest, reminding me of myself 15 years ago. "Ma'am," she said, "after everything you went through, how do you trust again? How do you open yourself up to love when you've been betrayed like that?" The room went quiet. It was the question everyone wanted to ask, but few had the courage to voice. I thought about it carefully before answering. "Trust isn't about blind faith," I said finally. "It's not about believing someone would never hurt you. Real trust is about seeing someone clearly, their strengths and their flaws, and choosing to be vulnerable anyway. But it's also about protecting yourself, having boundaries, maintaining your independence even within a partnership." I paused, looking at the faces before me, all of them searching for answers in an uncertain world. You can love someone completely and still maintain separate bank accounts. You can commit to a partnership and still have a prenup. You can be vulnerable and still be smart. These aren't contradictions, they're wisdom. My grandmother taught me that independence isn't about being alone. It's about being whole with or without someone else. When you're whole on your own, you can choose a partner from a place of strength, not need. And that makes all the difference. The young captain nodded, and I saw understanding dawn in her eyes. After the workshop, as I drove home along the Potomac, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The pain of Nathan's betrayal had faded to a dull memory, like an old injury that only aches when it rains. In its place was something infinitely more valuable purpose. Nathan had tried to steal my grandmother's money, but he'd actually given me her greatest gift, the opportunity to turn pain into purpose, to transform betrayal into a mission of protection and empowerment for others. I pulled into my parking space at the apartment building, my simple Honda Accord, yes. I'd gone back to Honda, fitting perfectly in the spot. As I walked to my door, I passed the storage unit in the basement and remembered something. I went down and opened the unit, digging through boxes until I found what I was looking for, my grandmother's photo album. I brought it upstairs and spent the evening going through it, seeing her life in pictures. Rose as a young teacher in 1950s California. Rose at her retirement party surrounded by decades of students. Rose at my military academy graduation, pride shining in her eyes. In the last pages, I found a letter she'd written to me but never sent, dated just a month before she died. How it ended up in this album, I'll never know, but I suspect she wanted me to find it eventually. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone, and you're probably wondering what to do with what I've left behind. Here's the truth, sweetheart, the money isn't the inheritance. The inheritance is what you do with it. I saved every penny not because I was afraid of being poor, but because I wanted to leave you freedom. Freedom to make choices, freedom to take risks, freedom to fail and get back up again. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting what's yours. Don't let anyone convince you that strength is selfishness or that independence is isolation. The right person will love you not in spite of your strength, but because of it. Use what I've given you to build something meaningful. Help others. Stand tall. And remember, you are your own best investment. All my love, Grandma Rose. I sat there crying, not tears of sadness but of gratitude. Rose had known. Somehow she'd known I'd need these words. This reminder of what really mattered. 2 years have passed since the divorce. The Rose Winters Foundation has expanded to 3 states, helping thousands of military families protect their financial futures. Sarah and I have become even closer. Our friendship forged in the fire of legal battle and emerging stronger than ever. I've dated a little, nothing serious yet, but I'm open to the possibility. The difference is that now I know what to look for and, more importantly, what to avoid. Last month, I received an unexpected email. It was from Nathan's mother, a woman I'd met only twice during our marriage. She wrote to apologize for her son's behavior, saying she'd raised him better than that, but somewhere along the way, he'd lost himself to greed and entitlement. She thanked me for not pressing criminal charges, which Sarah had wanted me to do, and said she hoped I'd found peace. I wrote back, telling her that I had found peace, that her son's actions had ultimately led me to my life's purpose. I didn't tell her about the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, the therapy I'd needed to trust again, the way I still sometimes checked locks twice before bed. She didn't need to carry that burden. Nathan's choices were his own. As I finished telling you this story, I'm sitting in my office at the foundation. On my desk is a photo from last week's workshop, 50 military families, all smiling, all holding certificates of completion from our financial literacy program. On the wall behind me hangs my grandmother's portrait and beside it my bronze star. Both remind me that courage comes in many forms. Sometimes it's facing enemy fire in a foreign country. Sometimes it's standing up in a courtroom while someone you once loved tries to destroy you. And sometimes it's choosing to transform your pain into purpose, your loss into someone else's gain. Nathan thought he was stealing my fortune. What he actually did was show me what my real fortune was, not the money my grandmother left me, but the strength she taught me, the resilience I'd earned through service, and the ability to turn the worst chapter of my life into the beginning of my life's most meaningful work. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, thank you. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, know that you're not alone. If you've ever had to rebuild your life from the ground up, know that it's possible. And if you're currently in a situation where someone is trying to manipulate, control, or steal from you financially, emotionally, or otherwise, know that there is a way out. Document everything. Trust your instincts. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting yourself. And remember, the best revenge isn't destroying the person who hurt you. It's building something beautiful from the wreckage they left behind. My grandmother used to say, money isn't wealth, Margaret. Wisdom is wealth. Independence is wealth. Purpose is wealth. Money is just a tool. She was right. Nathan took some money that was quickly replaced. But what he couldn't take, what no one can ever take, is the wealth of knowing who you are, what you're worth, and what you're capable of surviving. I am Lieutenant Colonel Margaret Winters. I am a soldier, a survivor, and the founder of something that will help others long after I'm gone. Nathan wanted my fortune, but what he gave me was worth so much more. He gave me my purpose. And that, as my grandmother would say, is real wealth.